Good evening, everyone, and thank you for braving the snow and coming out to join us tonight. I am pleased to welcome this extraordinary panel to campus to discuss the relationship between nonprofits and government. And a special thank you to Kirsten Lodel, who is a visiting fellow at the IOP this week. She'll be leading her second seminar tomorrow for students at 3:30. And next week, joining us as fellows, we'll have Shomik Duda and Betsy Hoover, who will be talking about political tech. Next Tuesday, February 13th, we are hosting a conversation with Pete Weiner and Michael Gerson on restoring American civility. And you can find out more about all our upcoming events at our website, politics.uchicago.edu. As is our custom, we will open up the floor to take questions from the audience. Please line up behind the microphone, which will be placed in the center aisle, and we'll give priority to the first 3 questions to be asked by our students. And just please make sure your phones are on silent, and the restrooms in the Quad Club are down on the first floor. So here to formally introduce our speakers tonight is Devshi Mehrotra. Devshi is a third-year computer science major from Irvine, California. And this year, she's the Campus Community Outreach Chair for our Student Advisory Board. So please join me in welcoming Devshi to the podium.
Hello, everyone. I want to start off by welcoming you all to this evening's event. My name is Devshi, and I'm a third year in the college, and it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce the 4 amazing panelists who will be speaking with us today. First up, we have Mr. Victor Dixon, who currently serves as the president and CEO of Safer Foundation. This organization serves to help formerly incarcerated individuals re-enter the workforce by providing them with support and resources along the way. Sitting to his left, we have Ms. Phyllis Lockett, who is the CEO of LEAP Foundations. Ms. Lockett received her bachelor's degree in industrial engineering at Purdue University and then went on to earn an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management. She now works at the intersection of technology and education to connect tech companies with educators in the development of novel learning tools. Ms. Kirsten Lodel is the CEO and co-founder of LIFT, which is an anti-poverty nonprofit organization which she actually founded during her sophomore year in college. The motivating force behind the work that LIFT does is to help uplift struggling communities with a keen focus on human-centric support and services. And as was mentioned earlier, Ms. Lodel is also a visiting fellow for this quarter at the IOP. And lastly, we have Mr. Kurt Summers, who brings a very interesting perspective to this conversation as the Chicago City Treasurer. In his capacity as the overseer of a multi-billion-dollar fund for the city, he has helped to fund social good initiatives ranging from those that help youth, the working class, and small business owners. And this entire conversation will be moderated by our very own executive director, Ms. Gretchen Crosby-Sims. The goal of today's event is to help us all understand the role that nonprofit organizations play in not only filling the gaps, these so-called gaps in society, but in themselves catalyzing social change and innovation. As you can probably appreciate by now, our presenters bring with them a very diverse array of experiences, and so I would like to ask for your help in welcoming them to the stage. Thank you.
I am delighted to have my first panel at the IOP be about the topic of nonprofits and social innovation and their relationship with government. The mission of the Institute is to ignite in students a passion for politics and public service. And one of the ways that we do this is we bring in elected officials, strategists, campaign strategists, journalists who cover politics. And that's one way of inspiring people to go into politics. But there is this whole other set of forms of public service that are represented by those on our panel that I think are incredibly exciting to spotlight and to understand the relationship and the form, sort of how they work with government and can represent a different path for people who are seeking impact. I think that everybody who goes into politics is by definition a public servant, but not everybody who's in public service is in politics. And so the opportunity for tonight is to sort of mix it up and shine a light on some of those alternative paths. I think one of the first things I want to ask each of our panelists to do is just to talk a little bit about what you do, what your organization does, the problem is that it's trying to solve, and how that, in your mind, represents a form of public service. And Victor, maybe I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Gretchen, and thanks to the fellow panelists and all of you for coming out on this snowy, cold night to listen to us. The Safer Foundation has been around for 46 years. We focus primarily on ensuring that people with arrest and conviction records get training, services, with the ultimate goal of them being employed in the private sector. We know that employment really reduces the rate to which people go in and out of jail and prison. So that's our focus. We offer a wide range of services, job readiness training, cognitive behavioral therapy, drug treatment, housing, transportation, academic education, vocational training, because it takes a lot to really help people get prepared. The problem that we're trying to solve is that we have mass incarceration in our country. We have 70 to 100 million people in our country with arrest or conviction records. In our state, we have 4.1 million people with arrest or conviction records. In a state that the total population is maybe 12 million and there are probably 9 million adults. The issue with having an arrest or conviction record is that in our country, you can legally be prevented from getting into employment, housing, education, public benefits. I mean, the list goes on, various occupations. So we have to find a way to help individuals kind of get into the mainstream of our society, become productive, have the ability to take care of themselves and their family, and basically keep them from going in and out of jail and prison. That's what our organization does. We serve about 6,000 clients every year, which is a drop in the bucket when you have 25,000 coming out of prison every year, and then 50,000 or more going in and out of Cook County Jail right here in our area every year. So that's what we are and what we do.
And just briefly, what kind of success are you seeing? Like, how do you know if you're making a difference, if you're making the impact?
Yeah, I think the thing that we want to see people go through drug treatment programs and get clean, and have the ability to pass the drug test and get a job and stay clean, and not have that as an issue in their life anymore. We measure bridge academics. We measure grade level improvement in basic academic areas, math and reading and et cetera. We measure what percentage of people in the GED program are successful in getting their high school equivalency done and successfully. We measure, people, their completion of vocational training programs and earning industry recognized portable and stackable credentials. Of course, we look at job placement because that's very important. How many of the clients end up actually getting employed in the private sector. And we monitor wages and job retention as well. And then ultimately, we're looking at how we can reduce recidivism. We were talking earlier about the fact that when people get skilled labor and they're able to earn a living wage, that recidivism rate drops from our average about 45% for our state of people going back to prison down under 20%. And the higher the wages go, the lower that recidivism rate goes. And that's a benefit to everybody, not just that individual. Okay.
Phyllis, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and briefly about what you did before, because I know you've worked in sort of in education in a couple of different forms of public service, and it's worth sort of talking a little bit about the different approaches.
Absolutely. Thank you all for coming. You guys are like my kind of people. You came out in the midst of all this. So thanks for being here. So again, Phyllis Lockett, and I actually grew up on the South Side in Chicago Public School graduate. Both my parents were Chicago Public School teachers, and I had no intention at all of being involved in public education. But I think we all kind of grow up and become our parents somehow.
Yeah.
But I, just along the route from, getting an engineering degree to getting an MBA, I, moved back to Chicago and went back to the neighborhoods in which I grew up, Inglewood, Bronzeville, Roseland, and said, hey, was it this bad when I was growing up, or has it gotten worse? And I just decided that I needed to figure out how I could leverage my background to make an impact in the city that I love so much. So inherent to that, I got involved with an organization called the Civic Committee. That's a big public policy group in Chicago representing the business community. And I did a lot of work on leading a consulting subsidiary for them for many years, but then they decided to launch this massive initiative called Renaissance 2010, which was about creating 100 new schools in Chicago's most challenged communities. And so I was not supposed to be involved in that, but decided, I was asked to get involved and determined that I need to, this is what I should do, because I was probably the only one in the room who had attended Chicago Public Schools. So I led this effort, helped raise about a $70 million fund, and we helped open over 80 schools across the city. Most of them were charter schools, but we actually replicated Chicago's first magnet school. And we did a tremendous amount of work, and it occurred to me after about 8 years of that work that we still weren't getting it done. That this notion of this geographical approach of creating a new options was just insufficient, because by and large, we are replicating a system that is really a one-size-fits-all system that's leaving too many kids behind. And this whole approach around education, as it's been honestly designed since the turn of the century, this one-size-fits-all, teacher is the sage on the stage, and kids either fit in or they don't, right? I mean, you guys have probably witnessed this, where if you get the material, then you're kind of stuck because the teacher's moving along at the same pace. And if you're behind, well, a lot of kids fall through the cracks. And the result of that is that 2/3 of students who actually graduate from high school in this country are prepared for college. And honestly, if you think about Chicago, while graduation rates seem to be up, again, only 8% of the students who graduate from Chicago Public Schools will earn a college degree. So this whole notion around innovation was just inherent, that something dramatically different needs to happen. So I started Leap Innovations, and we're a nonprofit, and our focus is we really operate at the intersection between education and innovation. And we have been working almost 4 years old across the city and in partnership with Chicago Public Schools to reinvent what education is. And our hypothesis behind this is around personalized learning. And personalized learning is like Montessori, but also leveraging education technology resources where you're creating choice and options for students. Every single student has their own individualized learning plan, as everyone should, because every student learns differently, and that's okay. And that we should be not labeling students because they learn differently, but honoring those differences and helping to develop and tailor their pathways. So we are actually working with about 80 schools in Chicago. We have developed the first framework in the country on the teaching and learning practices for personalized learning. And we've kind of made a little R&D hub here. And we've got schools that are piloting these new practices. We are training lots of educators across the city. And then we're curating education technology solutions from all over the world to come to Chicago to pilot. And we're doing a lot of research on understanding teacher practices, as well as what kind of education technology tools, coupled with those practices, are driving student achievement. And to date, we have done a lot of research. We partner actually with the University of Chicago. We've seen at the student level about a 13 percentile difference between the students that are in our program versus the average Chicago Public School student. And we're learning a lot, but we do believe this is the future of what learning and education is going to look like. So we're excited to be part of this effort and part of the city. And the last thing I'll say is that Chicago Public Schools was so enamored with this approach that they have established a personalized learning department within the district. to see how they can help work with us in partnership to scale this throughout the city.
Great. All right, Kirsten, tell us a little bit about the LIFT model and why you started it, especially as a sophomore in college.
Hi. Thank you guys for coming, for being here, and I'm very honored to be a fellow this week. Hope you'll come and see me tomorrow and Wednesday at the IOP for office hours. So LIFT came out of what has been now more than really a kind of singular 20-year obsession that I've had, which is, I think, at its core to refute the still very, very present welfare queen narrative that lives in our country that has been such an animating force behind why I think as a society we still profoundly underinvest in fostering economic mobility. I'm also the daughter of a public school teacher, so that's probably a big part of where the justice nerve got turned on early on in life. Was always very involved in public service and spent some time between high school and college right as welfare reform was happening. And again, this kind of Reagan-era welfare queen narrative was under the Clinton administration coming back into our consciousness. I spent time working as an assistant teacher in a Head Start program in DC for predominantly homeless families, where the bulk of the parents of the kids in that program were young women, many of whom weren't much older than I was, who were serving typically as primary caregivers, primary breadwinners, loving and devoted moms who, even in the face of often transitional homelessness, were getting their kids to school. And I thought, I mean, these are superheroes. These are such unbelievable, powerful, resilient women and families. There couldn't be a higher ROI place for us to invest if we really want to see kids escape poverty. We should be pouring more support into parents, not less. And so that's where the idea of LIFT came from. We're now, 20 years later, working to empower parents to break the cycle of poverty across the country in DC, New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, pairing families of young children and partnering with them to provide the supports that they need around career pathways, education, financial services and capabilities, so that our goal is that in the earliest, most important developmental years of a child's life, a family can actually exit poverty and stay out of it, so that not just one, but 2 generations can be lifted over time. And we've seen some great success. This last year, our families saw over an average of $10,000 growth in per capita household income, growth in savings, debt reduction, and really meaningfully profound implications on family well-being around stress, social connectedness, all things that positively transform the environment in which kids are growing up, so that they can see a brighter future. So that's where LIFT came from.
Great. Okay, so we've got 3 social entrepreneurs who have started or are leading organizations that are delivering measurable value and better outcomes for some very high-need populations. In a previous life, I was at a private foundation, and we would fund nonprofit organizations like these, and the hope would be that they pioneer something new, a new approach to solving a persistent social problem, and that they get the evidence that shows they are succeeding better than the alternative, better than the status quo. And then the hope is that when you pilot this effective program and you produce the evidence that shows that it's creating the results you hope, you then hope that government is going to look at it, take it over, scale it up. So Kurt, as our government elected official voice on the panel, when do you see, sort of how do you think of nonprofits as laboratories of social change? When have you seen examples where it's worked, where the social sector, the nonprofit sector, has come up with a solution that's better than what existed before, and government has been able to pick it up and scale it effectively?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. This is an august panel. I'm excited to be here with you all. I was also very impressed by Devshi's memorization of all of our bios, which are very complex. So she did a great job there. You know, I've seen this as the representative of government, I guess. You know, I've seen some great examples just in my, I've been treasurer for the city a little over 3 years, and even in my role, in places where we've partnered with a couple of organizations to foster innovation, one example of that is a nonprofit called Simple Growth that helped us put together a basically, a mechanism to match lenders with small businesses in neighborhoods. And we all know the role that small businesses play in our economy, the role that they play in employing members of the community, and increasingly the role that they play, by the way, with folks who have been incarcerated and folks who, my family has a small business. They have 100 employees. 90 of them have been in the system at some point. And so I think that those entities play such an important role. And what has happened is many of them, especially those that are neighborhood-based and aren't downtown in the loop, have a tough time getting access to capital to grow and sustain their business and employ members of the communities. And those that do, particularly since the global financial crisis, are being preyed on by online lenders and institutions like that who, are showing up in their Gmail inbox or on their Facebook ads and saying, get $100,000 today in a 60-second decision. And what they don't tell you is you have to tie your payroll account to it, and you have to pay, upfront fees of 5 to 10%, and you have to sign up for APRs, interest rates of up to 200%. They don't tell you that, and so ultimately, the small businesses, the lifeline of our communities, are being strangled by folks who are seeing opportunity and are preying on them. And it wasn't necessarily government's role to, especially at the local level, given that all this is federally regulated, to solve that problem. But there's a nonprofit that said, look, there are responsible lenders out there that want to invest in small businesses and want to invest in communities. And most of the folks who are looking for capital don't know they exist. And most of these folks don't know how to get to those businesses. What can we do to foster a connection here and to bridge that gap? And Simple Growth, in partnership with our office and the small business majority in the U.S., said, what if we develop a platform? What if we vet all the lenders? What if we can offer the same kind of, relatively quick decisioning, but it's not at 200% APRs, and it's with CDFIs or small business investment companies or even other nonprofit lenders in that space. And is that something that you guys can support? Can you put it on your platform? Can you help us fund it? The hundreds of small businesses that come to you for funding needs, can you refer them? Can this be the vehicle? And we just saw a great opportunity where someone, saw a challenge in the marketplace, saw that there's an opportunity to fill that and still do it as a going concern and not have to, forego, a commercial opportunity. And there was a role that government could play where we're not the regulator and we're not the stick as too often that's where folks in government seats think they have to be, but we're the carrot and we can provide incentives. And that launched last year, and it's the first of its kind in the country here in Chicago. And now folks have up to $500,000 of available loans and lines of credit for their business through responsible sources that will help them employ more people, grow their businesses in our communities.
How about you guys, when you think about what you aspire to and the kind of impact you want to deliver in your careers over the next 10 to 20 years, what do you look at as sort of an inspirational example of where a nonprofit piloted something that got picked up and scaled and it changed public policy? I mean, I think one of the things we were talking about earlier is that I think people don't necessarily appreciate how huge the scale is of public services, government services that are actually delivered by nonprofits. You know, you sort of think, well, government provides this, but in reality, government is contracting with nonprofits or giving grants to nonprofits to deliver whatever, services to the homelessness or job counseling or working with ex-offenders. Victor, we were talking a little bit earlier about your revenues, and a lot of them come from government, right?
Yes. Well, a lot comes from government. I think we've been trying to diversify the revenue, and one area has been moving into social enterprises and more earned income opportunities. I mean, I think, you know, we have some examples of opportunities where we started doing vocational education and helping people get prepared for skilled labor employment in the private sector. That started very small with some grants from the Chicago Community Trust, then got supported on a larger scale by the state, and then ultimately the federal government, and now we're starting to see even private sector companies that are starting to step in and want to be involved in this because they have such a need for skilled labor. So we've seen this thing grow and grow and grow over the years, but it started with trying to come up with a model that made sense and that had impact and showed results, and then trying to scale it from there. So, you know, and that happens frequently, I think, with opportunities to work with government, just like the Treasurer Summers. I mean, I'm sure that eventually, if that's successful here in Chicago, Simply Growth, it'll be happening all over the country because governments are always looking for those kind of things that work and deliver results. So.
We were talking earlier today in Kirsten's seminar about where the locus of change is and where the energy is for replicating success. And I think there was a sense that maybe right now it's more at the state and local level for certain kinds of programs and innovations. And I wonder if that's a view that fellow panelists share, or would you look more to the federal level for innovation right now?
So I have my view is it's tough, right? I think it's hard, just given the day-to-day pressures that government confronts. Our charter aside, it's just really tough to innovate, right? It's really difficult to think about, to step out of the extraordinary pressure and incredible agendas that our government leaders have to deal with and face on a day-to-day basis, and within city government, state government, to really take a step back and innovate. And I know in all of kind of the cycles of my career since leaving corporate America, having run the Civic Consulting Alliance and really partnering with business organizations to really build and develop solutions that could work in partnership with government to help drive change, to doing the work with New Schools for Chicago in conjunction with Chicago Public Schools and now LEAP. I really do believe strongly in the power of public-private partnerships, and that the need to have people like you in this room who can bridge some of the experiences that you're bringing to partner with government to drive change, I think has been the best examples of what I've seen to make a difference. I mean, Treasurer Summers has a business background as well from McKinsey, and I think we're able to kind of connect the dots. Him coming into this role to see an opportunity to drive it, but those opportunities are far and few between, and we really need to get more leaders, I think, from all kinds of spectrums involved. But in the public-private partnership model is where I see a lot of this type of innovation and potential for sustainable change to take place.
Can I share? So one example. I mean, it's amazing to think so many of our core programs like Head Start, they are modeled off of small private examples of Perry Preschool or other things you can look at that were wholesale mainstreamed. But I think they're also, we talked some about kind of low-hanging fruit opportunities to partner. kind of what are the tentacles of scale that may not necessarily even be the wholesale replication of a private program model. And one example that I can speak to from Lyft's experience, this is going back more than a decade now in DC, we were finding that many of our families were coming in with Section 8 or housing choice vouchers that you could place with a private landlord to get partially subsidized housing based on your income. But part of what was happening is that there were time limits on the vouchers, and there was no mainstream database of the landlords that would accept the vouchers. And so you were finding that families didn't know where to go to place the vouchers, were literally calling through the phone book, taking the bus, it costs money, taking kids around with them, and this just seemed like such a simple disconnect, but that was creating huge issues because across the city of DC, vouchers were expiring at high rates, and the message then that was getting sent back to the federal government is that this was an underutilized program, when in fact affordable housing is a huge crisis in many of our cities. One example, we had some very talented Georgetown University and GW students who were working with us, who had great computer science backgrounds, who just thought, gosh, we could build a simple technology platform if we could get some other homeless service agencies and providers to commit to using it that could become this database of open vouchers. It became something called the Online Housing Resource Project. It ultimately was taken on by the city of DC and turned into a platform that the whole city could use. It has lived on. But that was, I think even one example of how, had we just kept that innovation to Lyft, it would have helped a couple hundred, a couple thousand people, but because of partnering with other nonprofits in the city, it became a citywide resource that went so far beyond one organization.
Mm-hmm. If I can mention one other thing that maybe the audience might want to look into, a little more than a year ago, the county established a Cook County Commission on Social Innovation. And it is a partnership with various government officials, folks from the private sector, nonprofits. And that commission has made some really significant recommendations to really try and come up with creative ways of stimulating the local economy, getting people who in underserved communities connected. As an example, we made a recommendation to the county that would really expand the Metro rail system and create more stops, connect more communities, create the ability for a person to go from the south suburbs with one fare and go all the way to the job centers around O'Hare Airport, creating feeder bus systems, express buses to come in and connect people on the west side of Chicago to give them access to this transportation resource. So I do think that there are ways to create a forum where you can develop this kind of public-private partnership expressly for the purpose of beginning to think through innovative ways of solving problems. And that's just one of them that there are other recommendations. Check it out on the website, go take a look at it, and I think you'll see some exciting things.
What are the conditions that have to be in place for these public-private partnerships to work well? Because a lot of times they don't. A lot of times you get people around a table with the best of intentions and a lot of talk about the great things we're going to do together, and they don't come together. What are the conditions? What's the secret sauce for when those things work?
Yeah, well, so one, having had experience where I've seen this work successfully and not successfully, I've got like some scar tissue, some wounds from it. I'd say a couple things. One is, and this also ties to the question of state and local versus federal. I think necessity is the mother of invention and innovation, and there has to be, I think, in order for a government partner or a large private institution, donor sort of partner, to truly invest resources and to stay committed, there has to be a pain point, right? You have to be, in many respects, providing aspirin and not vitamins. Someone has to have a headache, and you've got the aspirin. And because there are a lot of great ideas, there are a lot of, folks out here every day, leaders like the ones on this panel who are trying their best to solve a problem, but there has to be this shared interest between those advocates and those folks who are fighting the good fight day to day, and the big bureaucracies and big institutions that you want to invest. And I think that the greater the shared interest between those groups, and the more that interest is solving a pain point, like a true pain point, the greater the likelihood of success. The other thing that I personally found to be challenging, that I think is unique about the example that Kirsten gave, is it's, oftentimes you have a group of nonprofits who are all touching an issue in different ways, and getting that group of folks to say, we're all going to work together in our lanes, and we're all going to collaborate and not sort of compete for your dollars, and we're all going to participate in this and bring our special sauce to it, or not, is also very challenging in the education space, very challenging in workforce development, very challenging. You have so many different actors, and I've sort of seen the other side of this, where government's ready or a large private institution's ready, and every advocate or nonprofit is sort of trying to take the lead and take the pole position at the expense of others.
Yeah. One of the things that I did in a previous chapter was work on a presidential campaign, and I remember the incredible feeling of, wow, we could really make a difference. If we have the right ideas and we win, we can really make a difference. When you're in that situation, or when you're in government, you're looking for new ideas, and you're looking for something that hasn't been tried before because you need it to be sort of new, and you're looking for something that works, and you're looking for something that fits your needs. And if somebody comes along with the right with a solution that fits your parameters, you can pick it up and you can run with it. But oftentimes, people in government are looking to, invariably, the nonprofit sector, whether people are in service providing organizations or in think tanks or in programmatic places. They're looking for new ideas from the nonprofit sector. And as we think about impact, there's incredible power in government, but there's also this incredible power to be the person who supplies government with the new ideas.
100%.
I think we're going to turn to questions in just a minute, but I want to ask each of you quickly, what's the one, if you could leave people in this room with sort of the killer fact or the killer nugget that drives you towards change, either about the problem that you're working on or about the solution that excites you so much that you're getting up each day to work on that? Is there one kind of fact or data point that you wish more people knew in your field? And I'm asking specifically in each of your fields, and then whatever you'd like to offer. Kirsten, why don't we start with you?
I think, again, there's a cartoon version of who it is that's living in poverty in this country, and then there's reality, and the reality is just that in every community that we, in this country, people are striving incredibly hard to create a better future for their kids, and they're hustling. The story of poverty in this country is the story of working while being poor, and people being incredibly resourceful to get ahead, and it doesn't take a lot of that redistribution of capital into the hands of driven families to make enormous changes that will have ripple effects to come. And that's what we see every day at Lyft. We see a little bit of partnership and support can have multi-generational implications if we actually trust families and put opportunities and capital, financial and social capital, into their hands.
Phyllis?
Oh, I think, education, I think, is foundational to our country and its future. And that if we can get access and equity right in education, I think it will fix a lot of things. Poverty, the recidivism challenges, et cetera. And, my belief is every single child, no matter how they show up, has the potential to learn. We know this now in brain science and in learning science, that if we can meet students where they are and tailor that learning, that kids can accelerate and achieve. And so that's why I get up and do what I do every day.
I think for me, it's a realization that the issue of reentry is, probably most people, you'd say, what are the problems we face in Chicago? They probably would never say reentry. But the reality is when you have communities where 40 to 60 or 70% of the people have a criminal record, and because of that, they can be legally denied access to housing, employment, education, public benefits, and so many things. If you really look at, is there any one group or demographic that has such severe problems? I can't find one, and I mean it's a large group of our population. Now, on the flip side, when you see those people get an education, get a skill, get housing, get a job, and you see that they become able to take care of themselves and their children, and you see the transformation, I mean, that's what's worth getting up for every day, to see the impact that you can have
Quick
on their
follow-up.
lives.
I think I read somewhere that it costs something like $40,000 to house an inmate for a year. And I'm
Yes.
wondering what the rough ballpark would be for you to provide your services and help somebody get on a path towards not reoffending. I'm
Probably-
guessing it's a fraction of that.
I mean, if you go to some of the most expensive vocational education programs, for example, so they can get a skill and earn a living wage, it may be $7,000 or $8,000.
Okay.
And so, I mean, and so one thing, and Treasurer Summers will appreciate this. We had a big drop in the stock market today. and they're talking
Largest
about
in history.
largest in history. One thing they talked about was the wages going up and the unemployment being so low. But economists are starting to say that mass incarceration and the opioid epidemic those issues are hurting the economy, because there are too many people who should be in the workforce working and they're not. The companies can't find skilled workers. There's a shortage of workers. It's driving wages up, and that's going to stall the economy. Jeff Krasinec with Fifth Third Bank is here in Chicago. He's their chief investment strategist. He's going all over the country saying to business people and other people in the financial community, the social problem is becoming an economic problem. And it's not hurting just the people who have records, it's hurting everybody.
Right.
And that's what we can all, and when we solve the problem, we all benefit.
Yeah. So maybe the question then for you, as you think about, you're the steward of the city's finances and investing those dollars, where's the highest impact return on investment for you as you think about, and particularly where you have discretionary dollars?
Yeah, well, that's discretionary is a matter of debate. We were talking earlier, I was a high school debater, so we both were. But I think that the general message, I think of two things. I grew up in Bronzeville, not far from here, lived on the south side my whole life. I'm a product of Chicago Public Schools. And the reason why I took this job is I remember being a kid and asking my parents, why does our neighborhood look like this and theirs looks like that? Why aren't we worthy of investment? And who makes that decision? And I fast forwarded 30 years and I said, why does that same neighborhood look the same or worse in some cases? And there's the Einstein quote that the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. We've been doing the same thing for decades, and when you look at the question, so that gives you the premise that you can't continue down the same path and expect anything but a different result. And so where do you focus your innovation? That means you have to innovate. So where do you focus your innovation? I think is where the contrasts are greatest and where the economic impact for the greatest number of people. This last point that you made was 100% right. The unemployment rate in the U.S. is 4.1%. In Chicago, it's about 4.5 or 4.6%. In 20 communities in Chicago that are largely black and brown communities, it's 3, 4, or 5 times that amount. And if you look over the last 15 years at what's happened to our economy, tremendous macro numbers, but the amount of disparity and lack of economic mobility has widened, and it's wider than any other large urban area in this city. And then we wonder why we have the fiscal issues that we do, where you're leaving 30, 40, 50% of the population behind.
Right.
That
And the
aren't
violence
participating.
And the violence issues.
Clearly the violence issues
Absolutely.
are stemmed from a root cause, a root problem that is economic in nature. And the amount of disparity that exists contributes to that. So what I look at is where can I think differently about the resources that we do have that can make investments in neighborhoods and in people that can help grow the economy for everyone. And we look to do that every day. We look to do that with the local investment fund. We look to do that with investing in community banks and community institutions and partnering with folks. We do that because it's different than looking at government resources as expenditures versus investments. That's the innovation. And we focus in these areas where the gap is greatest. And the message to everyone else who hasn't had that experience is, this eases the burden on you. This improves the quality of life, lowers your tax burden, lowers your public resource burden. So you should want this too.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's time for your questions. Can we have some students first? Questions for our panel?
Sorry, this is kind of too tall for me. Hi, my name's Sukrithi. I'm a first year in the business school. Thanks very much for being here. Really appreciate your time. So over the course of my first year, we've had a couple of different people come in to booth and talk about kind of the changing landscape of the nonprofit environment, and that how funders are kind of moving more towards a venture philanthropy model. And Victor, you actually mentioned it. More nonprofits are looking into earned income revenue streams to become more sustainable. How do you think about the strategy for your nonprofits, including an earned income revenue stream, and how does that affect sort of your bottom line of the impact that you're trying to make? Thanks.
Well, I will tell you that we have, over the last 5 years, been very actively looking at and kind of standing up social enterprises to earn income. We have a construction company now. We have a building maintenance and repair business. We have our own staffing company. And we're looking at some other things as well. We see it, and we understand from the philanthropic community why this makes sense, because if I can give you $100,000 this year, and next year you only need 50, and the next year you only need 25 because you're earning your own income, that's a better use of the dollars. They can then reinvest that in new things and other organizations. I personally think that in the future, the only nonprofits that will exist will be organizations that are doing work that there is just simply no profitable way to do it. And the lines between what is a nonprofit and a for-profit social impact business are blurring to the point where, so I'm trying to get ahead of it and just become what I see the future holds for us.
I would agree. I think the days of nonprofits existing on the dole of philanthropy are coming to a close, and that in terms of LEAP, at this point, about 20% of our model we source from Chicago Public Schools. Actually, we have a contract with CPS and a few other local districts around in the region. But we are working on a business plan now because so many other schools and districts across the country have been using our tools. We're trying to figure out how to commercialize those and scale them. So I'm actually working with a developer out in the Bay Area to help us codify our tools and services into a revenue model that can be sustaining for the organization.
So I'm all for sustainable revenue streams, whether they're from the public sector or the private sector. But let's not let philanthropy off the hook. And especially if we're going to see a contraction in government services for people. I mean, the reality is, and we'll see where the stock market goes, but we have so much concentrated wealth in our society at the top, but actually a very teeny bit of which is given away. If you look at philanthropy in this country, in fact, the most generous people in this country have the least money. Yeah. Absolutely, in terms of the percentage share of household income that gets given out. So I also think you need that flexible, powerful growth capital and innovation capital. I hope that we can continue also to really push hard, given the amount of concentrated wealth and aggregated inherited wealth that we're seeing growing at astronomical rates right now in this society. There should also be another wave of powerful individual and institutional philanthropy.
Thank you.
Hi there. So my name is Andrew, also a first year student over at the business school. Mm-hmm. My question originally was for Victor, but I think it actually applies to everyone. I was thinking about recidivism, but I'm curious in particular, how do you all measure what interventions that you engage in that are most effective? How do you judge what's going to be most effective? And in particular, how do you manage the personal side, where so often it's friends and family that encourage bad behaviors among the people you're trying to help? How do you help overcome that with the work you're doing?
Well, the first thing I would say is that a revelation to me in this business, because we think about second chance, is that we have so many people who never got a first chance. I mean, they grew up in multi-generational poverty with poor academic achievement, underfunded schools, violent communities. They've been traumatized, they've been victimized as kids. And then they grow up and they commit a crime. So I think the first thing is to understand that, we do have to help people change the way they think. So cognitive behavioral therapy is almost, included in everything, because we do have to deal with trauma, and we have to deal with how people see the world and therefore react to it, and help them transition in terms of going into the workforce and learning how to deal with conflict and other things that come up in a different way. So it's really very important for us to do that, for people to be successful.
Yeah. Right. So we're an anti-poverty organization. So at a baseline, we're looking to show improvements in financial security, monetized, right, income, et cetera. However, this is, I think, where you have to look at impact and what drives impact with some nuance, right? We actually think, so we have career pathways programming, financial counseling, but that a significant driver of engagement and ultimately impact for our families is actually the work that we do to help people create more social capital, social connections, peer groups where they might not have role modeling. Dignified and respectful treatment, kindness is the #1 feedback point we get on our consumer feedback surveys. Just treating folks with dignity and respect that makes them want to come back. So, we've tried to layer in evaluation systems that aren't just looking at the outputs or outcomes, but that are getting at the kind of more subjective and relational aspects of humans' lives that we too often neglect, and then we get the program design wrong. We think this beautiful mousetrap, but no one's going to show up because we didn't get the bedside manner right, or it's not an engagement. So it's important to look at the full picture to know what then lands those, monetized outcomes or educational outcomes, because often it's more human.
Great, thank you.
So my name is Dylan. I'm a second year in the college. I'm wondering, so much of the issues that you talk about to deal with these massive gaps in income and wealth and education, I'm wondering if you put aside the matters of money or political considerations, what as a society would we be doing policy-wise, whether it's governmental action or philanthropic stuff, to really say we are not going to have poverty in this country anymore, we are not going to have these cyclical issues? What would be the bold visionary things that we would be doing,
Go for it.
So I'll start. I think there's a person who is a former congressman who in Illinois, surprise, went to jail, but he represented the 2nd District here, which is just south of us, and he wrote a book called A More Perfect Union. And it was about 7 constitutional amendments, which obviously we haven't, had in that collection since the Bill of Rights. And they were basically pushing us as a country to think about what kind of society we want to build and what things we believe are basic human rights. To your point, if you were able to take the politics out of it, could you ever pass a constitutional amendment? I don't know. Or the money out of it, can you actually fund this thing? And they were things like universal high-quality education, universal right to high-quality health care. This is before the Affordable Care Act. And things like that are being discussed now around the world, universal basic income to those that are fighting poverty in particular, and those who see the writing on the wall with innovation and what will happen to work and jobs as we traditionally consider them. I think there are a collection of things like that that we would have to say, here's what our values are as a country, as a society, universally, that should be a basic right for everyone to have at a minimum high level, and it's housing, education, healthcare, et cetera, income even. And I sort of think unless there is, if you going through that exercise, unless you sort of start from a premise of what do we value and what does every child in this world or in this country deserve to have as a right of their birth, then the rest of it, if you kind of don't start from that, gets bogged down in who, what, when, where, and who's behind them and what the other sort of broader political agenda is.
The only thing I would say, that operative word of what everyone has a right to.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because, from the inception of our country, it was never intended for everyone to have all these rights. And I think that's a very important consideration.
Yes. Great question.
A number of people have presented the paradigm of social entrepreneurs trying out some method and then government organizations scaling it up. But in the case of the Perry early child care, Head Start, which you could say scaled it up, wasn't at all like Perry. And the key thing really is the high quality early child care that Perry provided, whereas Head Start was more like a jobs program. But one can imagine large scale entrepreneurial organizations or private corporations which are very good at scaling things up. And one big economy of scale is brand name reputation, so that you could imagine a lot of the organizational machinery of capitalism could do a very good job of scaling things up. But then we have the specter of the robber barons coming in. So my question is really, like there's a lot of discussion in economics about corporate governance, and should maximizing shareholder wealth be the criterion, or is there some more complex kind of governance? So is it possible that there could be a kind of philanthropic entrepreneurship, that someone could create a large organization and would have to put at risk a lot of capital to do it, but proving that not just the small thing, but the large thing could work, then get sustainable revenue flows?
Yeah.
Do you?
Well, I mean,
I have a thought.
We've long talked about, right, the dream of high quality one-stop social services delivered through Walmart, or that. I mean, it's a very, very important, I think, contribution to this discussion to think about who is great at scale. And we've got government as one answer, but not the only. So what's the opportunity around corporations, especially that have high rates of saturation? And the Walmart example was also very relevant during Katrina, right, in terms of distribution mechanisms for water and other goods that FEMA couldn't offer. So I appreciate that point, and the Perry point too.
I was going to add, there are some corporate legal structures like benefit corporations and LC3s that allow businesses to function in the private sector, but have primarily a social purpose. There are some organizations as well, a couple of which are in a similar space. One of them is Greyston Bakeries in Yonkers, New York. They make all of the brownies that go in Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and they're doing quite well. There's an organization in Seattle, Pioneer Human Services. They have a manufacturing company that supplies Boeing, doing quite well and earning about $6-7 million that they use to put into their social services. So I think that we're starting to see that there's opportunities for social impact organizations to do things on a larger scale.
I think we've got time for 2 more questions. Quick ones.
So hi, thank you. Graduated from the University of Chicago some time ago, and I became involved in the academic environment after my graduation, and then recently became involved with the social non-for-profit organization. And when I realized, and it has been my frustration, I see a lot of disconnection between the academic world and the other non-for-profit organizations, and I think there is so much potential there. I don't know if you see that as, if you see that perception, that the one I have, and also my question is, how can we bridge the gap between the academic world and the rest of the non-for-profit world for innovation?
I'll try to take that one. So I think there are good examples and there are challenging examples. So I'll give a good one. I'll give both. So University of Chicago, I think, has a great example with the Urban Education Institute that has done an amazing job in partnering not only with Chicago Public Schools, is really one of the main resources for research and public education here, but also in partnership with a number of education reform organizations that are working collectively. So that I think, and I think also think about what's the other one that Rosanna Ander runs?
Crime Lab.
The Crime Lab is another phenomenal example where research is really partnering with government and a series of nonprofits to drive that research and drive change. And expose, and help to kind of expose or elevate what works. Sitting at LEAP, which is interesting. So as you think about, we're kind of on the cusp of this innovation work where it's not like anybody's total pain point, although it is. They don't realize it yet. But we've constructed our own research advisory group. I've got a national group, But it's been super hard as we're evaluating teacher practices, we're evaluating efficacy on ed tech products, et cetera. But if it doesn't fit in the academic paradigm, right, it's really hard to get academics to help us think about what this is going to look like. And the future of learning is exactly tied to what we're talking about in terms of workforce, creating individuals who are prepared for the kinds of skills that for jobs we don't even know exist yet. So I kind of see it on both sides, and I think it is really a matter of building enough proof points, enough support to get the academic institutions to come and get involved.
Thank you. Last question.
Thank you for being here. From a funder or nonprofit perspective, how do you actually incentivize service organizations working in the same area to collaborate instead of compete with the same limited resources?
Yeah, so I shared a little bit of a war story there where it didn't work out. And what I learned from that was there are two things that we didn't do. We didn't provide for kind of equal share participation, kind of, sort of a rising tide phenomena here. And we didn't have specific lanes with specific metrics that led to specific, rewards. And I think that, if I were to sort of undertake a very large initiative, again, that required, dozens of social service agencies and nonprofit partners, I would do a better job of both aligning individual incentives so people could see the direct impact of their contribution and their metrics, but also help understand, the broader participation from the work that's done and the resources that are available.
So yeah, just taking things from the perspective of the intended end user. Again, another thing I actually think private sector companies, the tech sector does well, and we often don't do well enough. Really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which organization is doing what. It matters that an individual has a seamless experience. And we've been able to scale quite a bit by embedding within other organizations that do one piece of the job and we do another. And I think there's more and more interest on the part of funders in collaborative proposals to ask for much larger amounts of funding. So I think that's a positive trend we're seeing both in public and private philanthropy for funding.
On that hopeful note, I want to thank our panelists for the public service that you do every day. I want to thank all of you for having found your snow boots in the back of your closet to now allow you to be with us tonight. And thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.